Well, hey there, everybody. We're here for another Walkabout Talkabout, this time with a few of the team from Polyarc, the makers of Moss and Moss 2. So we're going to kick this off like always. I'm going to go ahead and take a hit, and we'll all of us introduce ourselves. So I'm Lucas Martell. I'm the creator of Walkabout Mini Golf. And, yeah, I haven't played this course in a while. I always like these just because it's an excuse to kind of go back to a few of the earlier ones. So, but yeah, I'll hand it over. Why don't you guys, Barton, go for it.
For sure. I'm Barton. I'm a principal designer at Polyarc, and was one of the designers that helped make a lot of the early levels and kind of the end levels in Moss Book 2. Yeah, could take a shot here.
Skazza Pro.
Nice.
Solid shot.
Great course.
Hello. I am Danny Bulla. I'm one of the co-founders of Polyarc. And Moss 1, I was doing more creative direction. On Moss 2, I just got to help out on the boss fights and level design there. So did a little bit of everything. Now I'm learning how to putt. Get the turn.
Nice.
I'll work with that.
Good shot. Good shot.
Nice.
Hi, everybody. I'm Chris Barassa. I'm a design director at Polyarc. I helped out on Moss Book 1 and Book 2 with levels, character combat, and some AI work. Now the pressure's on. Not everybody made the turn. Well, it's too hard.
Oh.
Nice.
Risky, but bold. Like it. Awesome.
Little drama.
Well, yeah, so I guess one of the first questions that I'm kind of curious about is just sort of like, so Moss, especially the first one, like that came out, actually, Moss came even before the Quest, didn't it? Was that out?
Yeah, PSVR.
Okay. Oh, that's right, because you were on PSVR 1. So, yeah, so you guys had done that quite a bit before the Quest came out then. Was there,
I think
go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think we were prototyping it starting prototype Moss around 2015.
Oh, wow, okay.
Maybe, and then like really starting to get going in 2016-ish. So it was pretty early. We were still using the DK2, I think, at the time.
So I'm curious then, did you actually design it? Because like one of the things that I love is that it's fairly traditional in the sense it's sort of like it's the controls of a fairly traditional platformer, 3D platformer, but you did integrate a lot of a great sort of like adding VR and adding sort of like the hand controls. So was that something that was that in there from the beginning, or did the PSVR 1 version not have some of that extra stuff?
Yeah, actually, one of our engineers prototyped together. They took a PSI camera and I believe it was the Oculus camera at the time. Was it the Oculus camera? Because that wasn't being tracked. But anyways, he attached the PSI, and so we were using a combination of the nunchucks from the PlayStation and using the PSI without any camera on the Oculus side yet, because that's true, it wasn't tracking yet. And so basically, he put it together, and so we were using PlayStation Move controllers with the nunchuck that is no longer there. So we had the joystick in the left hand, and we were using a PS Move in the right hand, and doing very, very primitive interactions and prototyping until the touch controllers came out. And that's sort of when we were able to like launch off. But yeah, so it was pretty janky early on, but it allowed us to start feeling what it was like to sort of move into the world with your hands and stuff. It was kind of trippy at that time.
Yeah, I remember, I know I've said that before, so I won't like totally reiterate the story, but I remember that very first time that I picked up the hand controllers, and at first I'd really thought like, oh, the hand controllers are going to be such a gimmick, and not realizing just like how much immersion that to me it's just as much as the actual headset to it. So, but yeah, that's super cool though to know that you were really not bad for left-handed.
What a
That was great.
But yeah, that you guys were like, was there any worry about that, or at that point did you already know that sort of like, oh no, the hand stuff will be ready in time for us to launch, that you knew that it was going to be there, it was just a matter of like you were kind of out ahead of it a bit?
Yeah, well, we, at the time we were at the co-founders and I were working at Bungie, and we were in Bellevue, and we had friends at Valve and at as well at Oculus. So we were starting to see the early versions of physical interaction with the Vive controllers. And I'd say personally for me, that's like what launched me into wanting to start working in VR is because of the physical input, which, you know, if you believe that games are a function of input, then like for me, I was just really excited because like think of all the new games that we could make with this new form of input, similar to touch on the phone, right? It just kind of opened up a lot of different genres. So I think that was actually something we were really excited about more than scared, or not scared, but like worried that it wouldn't, you know, catch on.
So I know you mentioned that you were working at Bungie. I'm also just a lot of folks watching these are kind of getting into the industry, getting into VR or just games in general. I'm kind of curious. Did you guys all come from Bungie or from the more of that AAA world, or what? How did you get into the games and VR just in general?
Barton, you want to take that one?
Sure, I'll kick it off. We all worked at Rockstar Games for a while.
Okay.
These two worked
The
there
three of us.
together, and then and then I worked there after them, and then Danny and I both worked at Bungie separately at different times. So yeah, I think basically all AAA background.
Okay.
I'm the not Bungie. I'm the not Bungie one of the group. I went after Rockstar. I went and tried a couple other startups and then bounced around a little bit before Danny gave me a call.
How did
And I'd
you
say
guys
some of the
find?
studio is probably
Okay.
around. I think the Moss team was probably 8 to 9, 10 people or so were all from Bungie, the original Moss 1 team,
Okay.
with a few from like BioWare and a couple others that joined up. Now we're a lot more spread, but early on it was a pretty high density of Bungie people that we met.
Yeah, I mean that. Yeah, you're going to work with the people that you want to work with, it especially because how big was the team for the first Moss game?
Including like our
16?
operations, 12 to 13. And then I would say 3 of them were developers by trade, but became developers because they had to wear multiple hats.
Right. Yeah.
Lincoln being one of them. I think you've met. Can I just launch this over? I think we're going to go for
I don't
it.
think you're gonna make that.
You think I can
Anything's
make
possible.
I mean, if you believe, heart of the cards.
Yeah.
it?
YOLO.
Part of the cards.
I mean, you got over.
Good idea.
You did get over.
Yeah. So I'm curious how you guys found that transition coming from AAA into more of, I mean, not only VR, but also more of an indie space. Like, had you worked on smaller projects before, or what was that transition like? Just because VR is notoriously kind of very small teams and indie development.
Yeah, it is. I think probably we all have our own sort of experiences with the transition. I think, for instance, I know Barton was looking for a smaller team, which is sort of how him and I got started talking. And then I know for us, starting us co-founders, is I think we just sort of wanted to have a little bit more expression, a little less scale, so that things we could be a little bit more nimble in general with our development, which is just something that isn't really the AAA scale games don't really afford that these days.
Right.
And so that transition was nice. It was harder to come to a smaller team, but it was so much more fulfilling relative to that, like in a different way, because now you're getting to do a lot more. You're getting to grow and do things that when you're in a larger scale, there's just, maybe not time or resources for you to be sort of more spread like that. You need to be honed in on the thing that you're working on. So I like that part about the experience. I don't know, Barasa, how it's been for you.
The specialization stuff's pretty huge, but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, getting out of Rockstar, wanted smaller team stuff, and did that for a little bit, and as indie studios can do, eventually the runway ran out, and kind of went back to looking for somewhat of a bigger studio, and that's when Danny told me that Polyarc was getting going, and at the time it wasn't right, but I started looking around the Seattle area just because the plan was always eventually get up here and be able to hopefully join up. So went to a couple bigger studios around here and worked with them for a few years, and then was able to get back to smaller to mid-sized team, and I think that's where a lot of the fun is, at least for me.
So I'm curious, do you guys feel that is it more of the scale that you're working at now, or does working in VR for you guys, again, it's for those who haven't played Moss, it's got some very specific things that are very VR, but it still functions more like a regular traditional 3D platformer than a lot of other games. So do you guys find that you're has VR changed much in how you're working?
It's interesting. I'm glad that you pick up on, I like to talk about it as sort of, we tried to make Moss a bridge between console games and VR. Like if you were comfortable with console but really weren't ready to jump full into like the full immersive VR experience, that's sort of what we were trying to create, this bridge for people that, haven't really done. Maybe they're not playing the console games as much because of the dual sticks, and now they, now that it's physical, it's a lot more intuitive. So anyways, I'm glad that you picked up on that. And I think we found that we really like that. Like VR is still in its infancy, and we want to help nurture it and foster it. And I think like being able to guide people from things that they're used to into this new medium is if we can do that with our games, that's awesome, because that's going to help basically nurture the industry and the medium too. So it's definitely on purpose, and I think we just keep pushing on that. I'll take my shot. Someone else can talk.
Big thing that's changed between that is like player comfort. There's like a much bigger focus on making sure that people aren't getting sick, and that we're giving them environments that aren't feeling too claustrophobic, things like that, which is definitely different from AAA space or like big games in general, big action games. Also going to take my shot.
Yeah, something that was on that, and what Danny was saying is, in part of being the bridge, Danny, when we had joined, one of the things that he sold me on was that Moss and like early VR is kind of a way to like pick the people up that like gaming kind of left behind, right? Is because we hit the after 64, like Nintendo 64, and kind of we got into like dual stick there with like the C buttons, and then all of a sudden PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2, and then you had like 17 buttons on a controller, and then there were people that liked games. My mom liked games and couldn't do it, but she's beaten Moss. And it's like, so we were able to kind of like bring people back into something new by, it can be a little more simple because the medium is so new, so it's like fresh again.
It's funny that you mention that, because I actually I'm kind of that same thing where I didn't grow up. I never had a console growing up, so I never got super comfortable with just sort of like the dual stick. And especially like I can do platformers okay, but once it becomes like true third person,
like you're controlling the camera and the movement. Yeah.
Exactly. I just never learned that. I can do like WASD just fine, but like if you actually, I remember I was trying to play Last of Us, and I literally couldn't get to the first hour of the game. Even on easy mode, I just died because I just didn't have that. The thumbstick.
It's dexterous coordination. That's hard. Yeah.
It's really hard to train too. Like I know a lot of people that are like want to play these games, and like for example, my dad wants to play first person shooters, and just can't get the dual stick action down, and it's challenging to train that. So this is a good medium. He enjoys being in VR too.
Yeah, but I was also going to add, but you hit it on the head. I had zero problems with Moss or Moss 2. I think the only issue that I had ever had at one point was just that I had to set, I think it was Moss 1 that I got like halfway through, and then I had to set it down for a little while. And when I got back in, I had to just like, oh wait, how do I do a couple of the mechanics things? But that's just games in general, unless it's ultra simple like this. But yeah, it's always
like even this, I had to remember how to just very quickly, the curve was, it's like, okay, how do I turn? How do I teleport? But that ramp of getting in is great. I would actually say this is a perfect, this game's has the similar properties that Moss does, that allows you to come and sort of be tranquil in it and hang out. I think you guys are leaning on social presence, which is another great property of the VR medium that other mediums don't really have. And whereas Moss, we sort of leaned into the character presence with the companion and stuff. And I think in general, it's like from the same thread, right? We're both looking at this medium that like really empowers presence. And creating an experience around it, which is great.
Yeah. So I'm actually kind of curious about the character stuff, and one of the things that I think you guys nailed is something that not a lot of people think, because VR think like, oh, I want to be in a place, but there's also something that just VR looks really, really nice when you've got a lot of little things. Like for us in God mode, when just everything is small and it's all right in front of you, VR just works so freaking well. Maybe it's just that you've got more resolution and you've got better depth perception was that close, but was that something that you guys 100%. Were kind of building in from the beginning?
Yep, that was I think that was sort of what pushed our art direction forward, which is that feeling that we had in those early Valve demos and Oculus demos where you could look in on the small villagers. There was a couple early demos of that, you know, alongside it being a little bit easier and cheaper on a production side if we're making smaller things and not grand, large things, it also really felt great and powerful in the medium. And so we sort of had that constraint going into that we wanted to look down on small things and do something small scale, and sort of was an option between aliens, toys, or rodents. And we all sort of resonated with rodents at the time. And so that played a big part, right? I think everything about Moss was medium first, and then out from there.
I don't know, I want to see.
So it's not like you were ever
Moss.
necessarily thinking of it like Moss was always VR, designed from the get-go for VR. It's not like there was ever a 2D or a pancake version of that ported over. It was always designed from the ground up.
Yeah, from the get-go, that's how we kind of started. We wanted to design from the medium up. In fact, we were at coffee, like moving, coffee cups around with our hands like they were blocks, and playing like a physical Zelda game while we were trying to imagine it.
I mean,
In
that
fact, I'd even wonder.
I was going to say, just to that point, one of Polyarc's studio principles is why VR, right? Like that's whenever we're having conversations about things, it's a great razor to ask, is like why are we doing this? Why is this in VR, right? And if you're gonna make something on this medium, porting kind of from like a pancake game over, while there are totally games that I've played that are fun like that without that like extra bit that makes it like in VR. It's like, why not just play on my couch with my 360 controller, right? Like,
Yeah.
so it's that little extra.
One of the other things that you had mentioned that, player comfort being a big part of that was that, you guys designed it kind of like an old school game where rather than it being scrolling that you were moving around, it's sort of like it's individual screens and like little tableaus that you're going between. Like, was that, how quickly did you find that like design idea in the process?
Cool.
Good.
Man, it's a lot to both
Or was
interview
that, or was
and
that
try to
another
excel
one that
at
was just
Puff
sort
Puff.
of,
No, that was fortunately we had that earlier prototype with the DK2 camera and the PlayStation Eye camera that I was talking about earlier, and I was playing around in Unreal, and because we were doing Zelda, like Moss was sort of like, hey, what if we, that like log line was like, what if we took Zelda, and allowed you to move the things around instead of like pushing the blocks around. So it's very, very simple, very, very simple. And hold on, let me make this shot. Pressure's on. Pressure's
Bang.
on. All right.
Nice.
That's a good sign for my answer. So the first thing one of the things that, sorry, I'm in your face, the designer brain in me said is like, how are we going to move how are we going to do the screen wipe? Because Zelda has that, because you called out the classic simple, on the design team we try to look back to the Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis era where there was a new medium and the games were very simple and had simple input, and so that was a big part of it early on, was going back and thinking about the simplistic retro games, taking those things. And so one of those was the classic, like you pointed out, the screen wipe. And so we know we needed some way to move the player around the world comfortably. And so we just tried the fade in, fade out. And then sure enough, that worked. We tuned the timings and stuff, but and then shortly after that, we're like, what if we played a page turn, as you did it, depending on the direction that you were going. And that kept the player immersed even when the screen was faded. And so just trying to do these things. And I think that's a big sort of overarching thing about VR development. It's like you were saying, there's some new people listening. A lot of the same things that players and developers had to do in game development still stands true in VR. You just have to solve the problems a little differently, but you're still solving basically the same problems. It's just in a different form of input, which causes you have to not be able to copy one thing from the other, and just adds a little more problem solving to it. Which I think makes it really interesting for us as developers.
So how did that process change much, if at all, for...
You can do that.
That's a little scrat. How much did that process change, or the team change, or what was like going to Moss 2? I'm just kind of curious how the process changed.
Process did change. You want to start, Barton, about that? 'Cause I think
I can. As somebody who got brought in for Moss 2, the big thing was team size increased quite a bit. We doubled the team size, right? Is that right? Yeah.
Got up to
Something like
20-ish,
that.
I think. 20, 22
Yeah.
from 12.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So pretty big team increase. And then, yeah, I mean, beyond that, I don't actually know. So Danny, you could take over Barasa.
Hey, yeah.
Yeah. I don't know who shot is.
I mean, I think it's yours. I think
mine.
one of the biggest things is we finished Moss One, and Moss One was a compact experience. It was good. So the first thing we kind of sat down and wow, you did it, nice shot. Was like people want more, right? Like the biggest feedback we got on Moss One was we just want more. So it was immediately like how are we gonna make more rooms? We tripled the amount of weapons in the game. So like we just kind of jumped right into like, let's prototype weapons. Let's figure out all this stuff. How do we, get more areas and environments? And, the backtracking was one of the big things that we kind of didn't have in Moss One that we really wanted to kind of put together was that, because that's like, if you want that Zelda feel, right? Like you backtrack in a dungeon, you go back through, you come back through with new tools, and it's that thing that you saw that you're like, oh, now it's the time to do it, right? And that was, something that the team felt, and we, people talked about was lacking in Moss 1, and that was, I feel like we did a really good job hitting that in Moss 2, is that with the new abilities and powers, you're able to come back through and play the same level or room differently now that like you've opened it up, so it feels like you're mastering the room as cool progresses.
Yeah, and so I'm also kind of curious. So you said that you pretty much rolled straight from Moss 1 into Moss 2. So I know you did was it Twilight Gardens? Was that the name of the expansion pack?
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, that's when we really embraced the quest. That was like the quest launch, yeah.
So, but you guys really sort of like rolled sort of like straight over into that? Oh, yes. I'll take it.
Wow, nice.
But so, yeah, at what point did you end up sort of like both scaling up the team, but then I guess I'm also just kind of curious if sort of like if you were working on other projects sort of alongside that, or if it's really been sort of like Moss and then laser focused Moss 2 from there on.
Oh, come on. It has not been. I mean, in general, I think Moss has been the game that we've been working on that has been out to the players, but internally as a studio, and this is another thing that was important to us, is that we have multiple projects. Sort of, we see that as like a vital thing for the studio's success, is to have multiple different projects, including IPs that other different players will enjoy, other different developers will enjoy. I think it can get really kind of stagnant if you're just working on the same IP or the same game as a developer, even if you love that game. And so just inherently, we've been actively trying to explore things, look towards the future of, immersive tech. So while we do have a team working on Moss, we have other teams that are sort of looking at concepts, maybe taking a break from like full production schedule and sort of just doing some R&D to catch a breather, or working on getting some of the projects we've already made onto other platforms. So we have a team, that does work on Moss, or was a team working on Moss. And then we have other teams that sort of look towards other things that we think is both important for the medium and also for our studio in general. So
you were talking a little bit about just the design side, especially with Moss 2, and sort of like that ability to pass back through. I'm kind of curious how you guys break that up, but also sort of like one of the nicest things that I've felt working on Walkabout is that each hole sort of stands on its own. And even a course, like it just breaks down into really nice little chunks that you don't want to put two holes that are similar next to each other, but in general, it's just super bite size, and it makes the design process a lot easier. How much challenge does that interconnectedness and also like having the story that has to make sense and the world needs to sort of all fit together? How much does that sort of more meta approach add to the design process?
a lot. A lot.
Yeah, I mean, I think
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, one of the biggest things that we had with Moss 2 and teaching mechanics, and I mean, you do a great job in Walkabout with it, as well as, while you don't have two holes that are this similar, I think it's Quixote that you introduced really like the wind mechanic, and it's like the next 2-3 holes are all like the solution, right? Because mini golf is a puzzle at the end of the day, and it's like the solution is all wind related, right? And then you start sprinkling. You don't see it for a little bit. It starts showing up, like in 20,000 Leagues. Like it shows up again. It's like, oh right, I learned this mechanic, and now that puzzle mechanic's back. And so, with Moss 2, we did a lot of, and even it started in Twilight Garden because that was when we introduced Quill's like first time the ability to give her like that special charge that you reach in and she can shoot her sword. So it's like, how do we start building puzzles using this mechanic? And then with Moss 2, the dungeons were kind of, again, very Zelda style. You get the bow in Zelda. It's like, well, now every puzzle is bow related, right? And it's like, I don't know the answer, but this is the key. I just don't know where to put it yet, right? And so we did that a lot in Moss 2. It's like, how do we teach you these mechanics? And then it's like, okay, we can put that mechanic in our back pocket for later in the game. And it's like, hey, do you remember how to use this? Because here it is again, right? And now it's in combination with another one.
Yeah.
Like, can you put it together?
And how much are you able to design either on paper or just like before you actually gray box stuff for things like that? Or is it a lot of like gray boxing and then just ripping it apart and rebuilding it?
We actually had a huge map that the design director built, and we utilized that to kind of like make sure that we have all the kind of pieces and stuff in each of the rooms, and we can look at that beforehand before we really get deep into the actual level design. There's a lot of gray boxing of that stuff kind of in that process, and that map certainly changed quite a bit, but I feel like that's kind of, after the initial experimentation and prototyping, I think that's was kind of our gold star or North Star for getting through everything and making sure everything worked and was well connected, and that we still had opportunities for the player in each room to go back and, well, not necessarily each room, but to go back and use the abilities that they gained, later on in the game.
Gotcha. So you basically had each of the mechanics sort of like prototyped on their own, and then went back on paper or just sort of like a big design that really just sort of like figured out how to use those. And one of the things that we always run into is sort of like something that is a really cool design idea, but isn't necessarily fun or just doesn't work as well as you thought. Were there any sort of like abandoned ideas or things like that you were really trying to get into that just didn't work quite as well as you had hoped?
Oh yeah, there's one enemy, and I think this was there's a whole process.
Oh yeah, man. As I tank the shot, all of a sudden the conservatory boss fight.
There's been a lot of stuff that's changed. I think there was this enemy that we had called a shielder. I think Rick's posted some some animations of it that it was just like, this is okay, but it's not really fun. And like we have a handful of stuff. Some stuff, sometimes it looks really cool, but it's like hard to read and hard to communicate. So I think that is part of it, and we sort of try to embrace. I'm just gonna go. Oh my gosh, I barely
tapped it.
We are gonna work on a way that we could basically give you a little mulligan on that, but not this one, not yet.
Today.
No, that's okay. We knew it was coming.
That would be a nice feature.
Danny, it's all right. You were just trying to not make me look bad. I appreciate that.
Yeah. But it's there's stuff that comes and goes. I think that's a big part of our sort of philosophy at Polyarch 2 is like, it's okay. You need to iterate to find fun. You're going to spend some time on stuff, and it might not keep going, but you've learned a lot while doing that, and you've learned, what was good about it. Like, what did we like? Oh, we really like that sound effect when you hit that enemy. Okay, let's hold that, but maybe the actual mechanics of the enemy isn't fun. And we really try to embrace that iterative process, which is another benefit of a smaller team. And like try to take the learnings from that and like focus in on the learnings and the positives that we got from that iteration. And like just set the expectations. Hey guys, we might throw away work. Like that's part of it because we're trying to discover and we're trying to find fun. We're going to get a little dirty. But it also implies that you need to play test a lot. And so that was something else that we did too.
It's also,
totally, yeah.
The throwing away is also kind of fun because I'm just like, I'm running through my head of everything that between Moss 1 and Moss 2 I've seen get cut. And it's like the building of it was still really fun. Like Danny said, the knowing what not to do is just as good as knowing what to do, right? You're one step closer.
100%.
So it's like
Yeah.
we got to play it. There was something for Twilight Garden that we were going to do is that you could actually, like, Quill was going to have like kind of races, and we had the idea that something would encourage Quill to hit checkpoints and run around and do all these races, and we built that out. And for a bunch of reasons, we didn't ship with it, but it was fun to build. And, we played around with it, and people were like, hey, we're racing, and we had fun. And then just at the end of the day, like, it's fun, but it's like, you got to cost out everything else, and it's like, it's just not worth it. But maybe it could come back someday, right? We've tried it out.
Yeah,
We pretty much
Moss 3
do
is
it.
a good point too, is that a lot of that stuff that we cut, like, something came out of it and we probably reused it elsewhere. We learned something from that was, and potentially even
100%.
directly took assets from it, or, logic that we created and used it to build something else.
Yeah. Well, and it sounds like a lot of that also comes down to is like pulling something out in that gray box phase is not that painful. It's if hopefully you just
Exactly.
it sounds like you were able to sort of like note that, and maybe that's also one of the benefits of a smaller studio. There's more people are able to play test something at gray box state, weigh in, and if it's really not working, you can cut it as opposed to it just sort of hanging around and getting a ton of actual like final art put to it, because that's when it really starts to hurt a lot more.
Right.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the biggest thing that really changed, while it touched everything in the game, it was sort of just in production what we prioritized when it came to player feedback with Quill. It was just like everything, if it had to do with Quill, that became the first thing that we needed to do and prioritize as like gameplay mechanics and as story beats and as like narrative situations that we put in. We already sort of had, really early on, and it's changed a bunch, but like lightly, it's still there, big broad strokes. We had a storyboard of like what we thought, like the story arc of what Quill's adventure was going to be. We sort of already had some elements of that sort of storyboarded out before we even, started working on production. So it was still within the same sort of narrative that we had planned, narrative arc, where, we were pushing hero's journey with Quill. So we just, all it did was make sure that we leaned more into Quill during production and made sure that we focused on mechanics that sort of strengthened your bond with Quill more so than like made you look somewhere else or took you away from that. It was just really like embracing all aspects, whether it's story, art, or audio and animation. It was just like, do we make a bunch of enemy animations? No, let's make more Quill animations. Like sort of that was that really fed into it after we saw how much players reacted strongly to Quill in it. So it did affect everything, and we did have the time. Well, it's relative to say we had the time, but we were able to like come out with what we needed to, given the time we had after we discovered that.
Gotcha. The reaction pass for Quill, I think that was pretty huge to make
Exactly.
it feel like really alive and really bond with the player.
Are you talking about sort of like the little animations, like the victory animations, basically?
Yeah, little high fives and all that kind of stuff.
Or
Yeah,
hints
just
if
the
you're
small
in a
things.
room too long. Oh, but like if you're in
No,
for
go
a
ahead.
puzzle too long, she'll try to like gesture, be like, "Hey, over here," or something like that to really make it feel like she's along, like she's trying to help you too.
Totally. Yeah. Well, that's awesome. Well, thank you guys for joining and playing around. It's great to I love just talking to other developers and finding out their process and everything.
Yeah, this is great.
Is there anything else that you want to add, or anything else that you want to plug? Moss 2 on pretty much all VR platforms. Anything else you want to plug?
Yeah, we've got Moss VR 2. Oh, sorry, I'm mixing them. I'm merging them. Moss Book 2 on PSVR 2. At the end of this month, it's actually both Moss 1 and Moss 2. So if you haven't played either of them, it's a good opportunity to jump in. We're really excited about the PSVR 2 headset. It's really exciting. I think just follow our Twitters, Polyarc Games. And I do have one more, piece of feedback for you guys in Walkabout. I think the find your lost ball or find the ball mechanic is the coolest thing, and it brings me right back to my childhood, because I grew up next to a golfing course, and I would go and hunt the balls and sell them back to the golfers. So you're triggering like inner 10-year-old Danny here by trying to find all these little balls.
The hustle.
I appreciate it.
My magic cards.
Yeah.
I
super
never
fun.
expected that was going to be as big of a thing as it was. It felt like a good way to get people to. We've had these big environments that we just wanted to encourage people to explore. Was really the idea. Even the Fox Hunt came out of that same idea, just sort of like, we've got the space, like why don't we use it for more than just mini golf? So cool. Well, thank you guys again for joining, and everybody for watching. We'll see you next time.
See ya. Thanks, Lucas. This was
Thank
great.
you.